I wanted to show you all what I've got going on with the Doomed campaign, which really is just like my generic title for all of my campaigns going forward, because every campaign except for one that I started has inevitably fallen apart. So every campaign is a Doomed campaign. So that's where that name sort of comes from. But today we are going to talk about 6 of the biggest things that I'm doing differently or I'm really excited about with these new campaigns. So we're going to talk about Mörk Borg and just how cool it is. It says Mörk Borg rules. It's not a rules video. There's plenty of other people who have done better videos. I just wanted to point out some things I really like about it and why I'm excited to try it. We're going to talk about the concept of a dungeon climb rather than a dungeon delve, which is going to be cool. The idea of a doomed flock, which is also going to be sort of a kind of Doomed Realm setting information or some cool context about towns and what communities are like in the Doomed Realms. Then we're going to talk about the platformer. I'm not going to say anything more about that till we get there. Same with APIT. Those will be surprises. We'll just see if you can kind of start to get a guess of what you think those might be. And then we'll finish with Doomsday. I already did a pretty big deep dive into the concept of Doomsday last week in my live sermon, but it'll be just kind of a little refresher and just retouching on the topic. All right, brothers and sisters, let us pray for the Doomed campaign. So Mörk Borg rules. 4 points I wanted to talk about. Number 1, what's really, really cool about Mörk Borg is it feels very player focused. Players make about what feels like 99% of the rolls. Like, it assumes that the monsters hit. So your players are making defense rolls to try and block the attack or get out of the way. It's very save based from what I can tell, as opposed to the monsters are all taking their actions and making their own checks. It's not quite like that how it is in 5e. It's just, I tell you the consequences of what is happening and you better make your save to avoid those consequences, not, ooh, let's see if these consequences might happen. In another video, someone put it really succinctly, and I should have just put it this way. They said, like, in Mörk Borg, it kind of just assumes the bad stuff happens, not worst case scenario. It's not like every time like the worst possible thing is happening, and it's honestly mostly in combat with the monsters hitting the players, but I like that it assumes the heroes are in a dangerous situation and they need to get out of it, not just they can walk through a dungeon and it's kind of like 50-50 if it's going to be good or bad. You know what I mean? Hopefully that made sense. So I really like that about Mörk Borg. Another thing I liked is that broken or OP abilities and items and gear and feats and all that kind of stuff is part of what makes Mörk Borg Mörk Borg. Like, if something is read as ridiculously overpowered, that's like a good thing. That's fun. It's interesting. I really like that the magic items and things like that feel like you're walking around with a nuclear weapon. If you use this thing, you could easily just kill yourself and the other people around you, or you could obliterate your enemy. There's a lot of consumable items, like a cursed blade that when you stab somebody, it damns their soul and they can never be resurrected, but it only works once, right? Like, those types of consumable, very powerful items, I think they're really cool. I think they offer the players a lot more dynamic choice making, because you've got this nuclear bomb that everybody's kind of sweating and watching you as you're like doing the meme of the finger on the button, right? Like, oh, like, are you going to use it or not? And I really like that. That's my play style. I don't want things to be safe. I don't like that. I think it's boring. Now, point number 3, mortal life is a cheap commodity in Mörk Borg. Players die really fast. No, the characters, or in my case, the martyrs, and everything basically in the world, if it's made of flesh, it dies pretty easily and pretty quickly, which I think is great because it means the combats go a lot faster. It means that your players don't have to wait until their 10th level to fight a dragon or whatever weird, crazy demon thing you want them to fight. Like, you could just throw that at them right away, and like, if they want to run, they can run, or if they want to stay and try and fight, they can do that. But it's not like unbalanced just for the sake of being unbalanced. I also like that about Mörk Borg, and that's kind of the second part of my point here, that martyrs or the heroes still get to be a badass. Mörk Borg has a reputation of being like the grim black metal album rule set, which it is. Like, that's how it pushes itself, right? But at least in my game, at my table, I want my players, even if they know there's a pretty good chance they could die, they're still doing cool things. I don't want them playing necessarily pathetic characters. I get why Mörk Borg has that aesthetic, and I want everything in the world to look and feel as gross and grimy as Mörk Borg, but I want players to feel like heroes and not just like bad guys. That's important to me. And I think Mörk Borg allows for that. And then the very last thing is that it's the easiest thing in the world to homebrew. And I have the book right here because I wanted to reference the class pages. This is one of the classes. It's one page. And like half of the other page is art. and then there's like a little description. So really, their classes are 1 page, and it's not 8.5 by 11. It's a like 6 by 9 book. So it's a flexible rule system that doesn't ask me to write what, I don't have to do this. I don't have to even worry about whatever that is, which is nice. I'm excited to not need to do that, and I'm excited to not have to ask my players to do that. So that is Mörk Borg, and that's why I think Mörk Borg rules. I also want to plug though, like Shadow Dark, Index Card RPG, Arcane Ugly, Crown and Skull. What are some others? Do I have others? Knave, Vermis, Blades in the Dark. Like, those are all other cool systems that I definitely considered, and I'll be taking rules from all of those and mashing it into Mörk Borg. But Mörk Borg's my vibe. But one thing about Mörk Borg that I bet you've also been able to tell is, as opposed to their like crazy graphic design layouts and things that can kind of be hard to read, I have like gone the opposite direction and am really leaning into that medieval manuscript, biblical Psalms layout that's clean and easy to read for the most part. Let's go on to our next subject here in our sermon today, the concept of a dungeon climb. So you guys probably are all familiar with my world at this point, the world of Urchin. That's what it looks like. It looks like a literal black urchin drifting through space. That's technically the unblinking eye. That is the moon of Urchin, but go watch the last stream if you want to learn more about that. Anyway, so since it looks like an urchin, those are not necessarily mountains, right? They are actually the spires of some ageless mega cathedral, heavenly like structure, basically. So is it a planet, or is it a giant cathedral with all of these spires going off in all these different directions, and there's so many of it? This thing is like on a scale you can't even imagine. Maybe it's a little bit of both, right? But that's the main idea, is that the dungeons go up into these spires. They don't go down. They're up and open, which is, I think, very, very different. Point number 2, the dungeons. Oh yeah, this is really, really cool. So because they are literally spires of this mega church, is it the Church of Doom that resides at the center of the world? Maybe, who's to say? But these spires are so old, right? If the entire world is covered in them, that's impossible. So we're already in this like crazy concept of a world covered in spires, but that would take so long for the mortals of this world to do that it's kind of like the Washington Monument, where like the stone of that monument changes as it's being built, because I actually can't remember exactly why it changed. But if you look, like, there's a distinct difference in the architecture, and that's how I want the spires to be. Like, if you were to follow a spire to the very, very bottom, you would get back to the surface of the world, and you would discover, like, the first church or something like that. And is that some crazy technologically advanced age that had spaceships and things like that? It's just been forgotten down in this winding labyrinth of spire canyons, right? Or is it like primitive cavemen shrines that, as they've gotten built upon and stacked in stacks, and mortals over the eons and millennium have continued to build their spires, have they like gone into the dark ages as they go up, or have they gotten technologically advanced as they've gone up? And it can be different on different parts of Urchin, different spires, right? Like, the whole world doesn't have to be medieval fantasy. If you want a few of the spires to have that vibe, that's cool. But then on the other side of Urchin, which is an undisclosed size, it could literally be the size of Saturn. There's actually a cool video I should link in the description about games with dying huge mega worlds, and that kind of inspired this idea. The point being, as players kind of move up or down the spires, it kind of is like moving from one church that was just simply stacked on top of the other, that was stacked on top of the other, right? And you can see that difference. So I think that's going to be really, really cool. Also, that you can kind of like look out. You look over the edge or out the windows, the huge blown out stained glass windows of these spires, and it's just howling black clouds, or the scorched pink and yellow sky of She, the god queen, the sun, right? Point number 3, spires ascend up into the heavens. That is really, really important, both visually important, but also to the core beliefs of the people. They believe that if they climb these spires and continue to build them high enough, they will be reunited with her. Because if you remember, in my last sermon, I talked about how the world of Urchin, right? If this is Urchin, probably a better way to do it, then this is the unblinking one. The moon, the white, that's the white star, right? Urchin is the black star, the unblinking one, or the moon, or he, whatever you want to call it, is the white star. And it is like this wormhole type thing that is orbiting around Urchin and ripping off parts of it and things like that. So they're trying to escape that. They're building up these spires to get away off of this planet and be reunited with she. And also, if you've noticed, he and she, I've started using that terminology. That's from the two-headed basilisks from Mörk Borg. So it's like, whoa, is the Doomed Realms in the same universe as Mörk Borg? Did he and she come from the Doomed Realms to the world of Mörk Borg? Like, I just think I want it to be shrouded in mystery, and who knows? I think that's what makes it cool. Point number 3, the subtle context there that if it ascends to the heavens, what happens if you go down? I already said it's a sort of timeline, right? Which I kind of jumped ahead. That's point number 4. But you can go down and see older and older churches. The people of this realm, I think, are going to refer to that as the crypts. So going up is the spires, going down is the crypts. And that's where dead kingdoms, dead martyrs, dead gods might be buried. Like, what's down there? Who knows? Are you going to end up in a crypt where the unholy ones were performing their genetic experiments to try and replicate the soul? Or you could literally just do the classic crypt and it's just full of skeletons and dead priests and stuff like that. You can do all of that. Going on to point number 3. This of all the slides is probably my most up in the air one. A lot could change about this, but here's my idea so far. So the doomed flock, or a doomed flock. Quick context for this. When I was thinking about this idea of a world that had spires and it's a lot of like vertical movement as opposed to overland horizontal movement, and just the fact that the world doesn't have a bunch of flatness to it, it's all jagged mountains and spires. I was trying to think, how do the people live on this world? Are there kingdoms? Are there cities even? Most mortals, I already said, seek to climb ever higher to get to the heavens. So they are like nomadic people. No matter basically where you are, no matter what community you're in, at some point, you're probably going to pack everything up and get going on the long road, or you're going to go up the spires, right? So no one stays anywhere for very long. So there's lots of ghost town. Well, there's not really towns. Like, entire spires could be completely abandoned, or you could have one spire that only has one soul in it who is wandering up and down, or has been climbing it for 10 years and your players encounter them. Or you could have a small, relatively young spire that maybe a new up-and-coming king or queen is trying to build, and it's overcrowded. It's like people are falling off of it all the time. There's so many people on it. But people are like flocking to it. This idea of being on the move, being nomadic. People have heard rumors of this new spire, so everybody comes here, and then, I don't know, some cataclysm happens, or the king is killed, so they leave and everybody goes off to the next spire. And to keep it player focused, the martyrs or the heroes, the adventurers, whatever you're going to call them, the people of the world, most mortals look to them as sort of the crusaders who are going to clear the way. If you go to the top of a spire, you're probably going to find a martyr there, is at least what most people believe. Is that true? Almost definitely not, but that's what they think. Next point. I'm considering having the players start with like 1d8 random pilgrims as part of their like party, or I'm even thinking of having it being called a congregation. And then that number can swell as the party like brings in new people into their congregation, or it can dwindle as part of their congregation is killed off. It's also a resource the party can work with. Who do you want in your congregation? Point number 3. This is an important one. Urchin doesn't have cities or towns in the same way that maybe your typical fantasy world does. Instead, I said they have things like cloisters or abbeys or tabernacles. In the context of the Doomed Realms, you got to remember things are compact and kind of confined to the spires. So you can't really ever have a city or a grand kingdom, at least not in my mind, or at least I don't want to. I'm kind of done with that type of fantasy world building. I don't care about doing that. I've seen it in Tolkien, I've seen it in The Witcher, I've seen it in in normal D&D, so I wanted to do something really different and just focus on small communities of survivors, of pilgrims, right? Of these groups that could range from like 1d4 to a couple hundred. You could have a couple hundred people, or even a couple thousand probably, like in a spire. But there are no metropolises. There are no grand, huge mega cities that are like bustling with people. There might have been at some point, but in the current Doomed Age, no. And then the last thing, the random traveler, it will almost always be better than the random town. From the GM side, I mean that to mean it's one person and you can make them really unique and they can offer an interesting resource. Whereas the town takes a lot more work and time. You have to be able to track and manage it. Oftentimes, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I feel like anytime players show up in a town, the GM, go, all right, what do you guys want to do in town? And then they're like, I just got here. I don't know what's here. And I'm like, that's on me. So I want to be better about that. And I think this can kind of address that. From the player side, though, I think the random traveler is still better than the random town, because I think you'll agree with me when you picture this scene. If the players meet someone traveling on the road, everybody's going to want to talk to that character because it's a character. It's something or someone to interact with. Whereas in a town, sure, players have a lot more resources at their disposal, but players, I find, just aren't necessarily as comfortable role-playing in town. That's why I think it's so common for you to take them to the inn or the tavern where you have the random traveler for them to interact with. Let's move on to point number 4, the platformer. I am so excited about this one. This is honestly probably the coolest slide of the whole sermon today. So games like Hollow Knight, Darkest Dungeon, Blasphemous, Castlevania, those 2D from the side, you're platforming, moving around. Like, I just think that is such a tight, cool, fun mechanic to explore. But at the same time, and this is point 2 here, I'm completely reinventing the wheel because it's a manageable sandbox with rails. If you imagine you're looking at the world right from the side, then you're just kind of mapping what is up and down these spires. You don't have to worry about the player's moving this way, if that makes sense. They're only moving this way along the map. What stresses me out when I'm game mastering and about map making is the map just can keep expanding in infinite directions in all, like north, south, east, west, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't keep track of all this. It's too much. And I want to just know what the world looks like. So taking that flat 2D plane and kind of flipping it on its side to become a platformer suddenly was like, oh, now I only have to worry about my world from one perspective. And that feels a lot easier to map. But it's reinventing the wheel because I'm just taking what a dungeon crawl already is. It's a confined, manageable sandbox environment. They've been doing that since the very beginning. So this is not some like, whoa, like what a crazy new idea. But I don't know why it kind of gave me just like a new perspective on it that I think is helpful, and I'm really excited to try. Point number 3, falling damage. Platformers, that's like the biggest risk almost all the time, is falling to your death. And I love that. I just think it's like this constant fear you can have in the back of your players' minds of, are you going to get into this fight? Are you going to try and jump over that treasure? Are you going to try and cross this bridge? Or are you going to go look for a different way, right? Because no matter what encounter you're kind of doing on a platformer map, especially a vertical one like this, falling is just implied. It's implied as a risk, and I think that's amazing. And last point here for the platformer, it's where physical craft meets the digital map. And I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. So keep in mind this idea of a platformer, right? You're looking at it from the side. And also keep in mind this is like, I just started kind of working on this last night, so it's not a finished product by any means. But wouldn't this be cool if this was your D&D map for your encounter, for a room? If you walked in and you had some sort of like crypt with these coffins, and this evil cult leader over here is doing some sort of ritual, and your players are moving this way along the board, and there would be like ladders and things like that for them to hop up on. And then you can stack them or put them next to each other as the players are moving to kind of build the dungeon. Now, some of you might be thinking, that's a really cool concept. It looks cool, but how in the world are you going to have the space in your house to like build out a cardboard dungeon? And that's a great point. I don't plan on doing that. What I actually intend on doing is having just a couple template boxes. It's basically how I'm thinking of it. They're just sort of blank, and I'm actually going to cut out an L shape of the side so that you can always have it like this, or tip it up and have just one side facing so that they can kind of be modular. I hope that made sense. I don't think it did. But I want just a couple modular pieces of this cardboard chamber terrain, because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture of it, crop it out as a PNG stamp. And then I'll just paint these up and make these into columns. And then I'll take pictures of those and cut those out. And all of this terrain that I'm going to be building will become digital stamps that I can take into Owlbear Rodeo or whatever digital tabletop I use. So I can build my own platforming maps, but it doesn't have to be all digital, because that's what I'm just trying to avoid like the plague. I'm only doing digital things that are fun. Like these slides that I've been making for today's sermon and last week's sermon were a lot of fun to make. I think they look really cool. So I'm enjoying that. But I don't want to just make maps on my computer, because sitting at my computer for 5 hours, fidgeting over every little detail of where I put that asset, it's just not very fun. So I'm hoping that by being able to make it with my own hands first and have it be like a craft will make it a more enjoyable experience. That's what I mean by physical craft meets digital map. We got 2 last slides, and I'll try and kind of get through these a little bit quick here because I've been talking for almost 30 minutes here. So APIT, what does that mean? It means always play in turns. This is from Runehammer, a piece of advice I got from his channel, and Index Card RPG that people have a really strong opposition to, and their instinctual reaction is they don't seem to like it, but I did it and I love it. And in the games that I've done it with, I've mostly heard good things from players of always playing in turns. How exactly you go about doing that, like is it always clockwise, or is it the players can go in whatever order they want, or I don't know. But the idea that you always play in initiative order, both in and out of combat, is something that I like. And I want to do even more of it and be better about it because it turns downtime into a resource management challenge for the players. If the players arrive in town and you just say, what do you want to do? We get the blank face, right? We get the, I don't know, what can I do? That's not very fun. And that doesn't really keep anything moving in terms of momentum or excitement. But if instead, when the players got to town, you asked them, how long are you going to stay in town? How long do you want to stay here? If you were to immerse yourself and imagine being a character in that world, going to town, you probably would be like, we need to be pretty quick here, right? We should get going. We can't be here too long. Or I've heard there's rumors of orc raids. We heard those rumors on the road. We should probably only be here for a night. Or it could be the opposite. It could be, we're exhausted. We've had our ass whooped. We need to take like a full week of rest in this town. You want to ask that, I think, before, because then that becomes the timer that the players are working within. You decide you're going to take 3 days of downtime. What do you do with those 3 days? And now each player has this little mini game of like, ooh, what am I going to try and do to get the most out of my day? And again, I'm going to say, I think it's important because I haven't actually tried this, but I'm pretty confident in it. You ask before, because if the players don't know how many days they have, if you just say like, you're going to be in town and have some downtime, what do you want to do? Well, I can do anything with an infinite amount of time. And that sounds silly. Like, well, obviously you don't have an infinite amount of time. The players are only here for 3 hours tonight, right? But your player's brain doesn't think of it that way. The player's brain is just like overwhelmed with this idea of, oh my God, I'm in a town and I can do anything. You kind of need to hold their hand a little bit there, I think, and make it more suspenseful for them. And it doesn't always have to be like, you're going to leave in 4 days because then the goblins are going to raid the town and you want to get out of here. It doesn't always have to be that. It's more of like, once the 3 days are up, they're up. And they're not up because I, the GM, threw a dragon attack. It's just assumed in the world you guys are just continuing on in your way. So I hope that made sense. To me, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it'll help my games. 2 more things with this. Always playing in turns, I make this point that it prevents the I cast fireball while the big bad villain is still monologuing situation, because the way I was doing it before, it wasn't. And now I think I'm going to fix it. Before, I kind of only played in turns in combat. And then in role-playing situations, I still made sure everybody had their turn. But I had this one player who basically every time a combat was coming up and my villain was saying something, they were the first to say, I shoot them. And it's like, okay, I get why they do that. I'm not frustrated with the player because the game incentivizes them to do that. The first person to I'm going to do something means initiative is rolled and you get to start playing the game. But that's not what I, as a game master, necessarily am wanting to incentivize. I want a good balance of rich, fun roleplay and having these cool monologue moments, and then also understanding this is a game and we kind of need to indulge that. And does it make sense for the heroes to stand around and let everybody talk? No, but let's work together and have a creative excuse as to why you don't run and attack them while they're giving this monologue, right? You set the minis out on the table and they're about to enter into the lair. The rogue does need to go scout ahead and take that turn to go in, and then he can listen to the villain monologuing, but it's no longer this, this big monologue in front of all the players. It's a monologue to their lieutenant. And the rogue is listening in on their turn, and all the other players have to anxiously sit and wait of but I don't want to be here. I want to be in there. But if I'm in there, I put the rogue in danger. Actually, I just had a kind of a thought. I've never liked the idea of never split the party. That's always kind of actually frustrated me, because in my mind, I'm play is the slowest when everybody's together. when all of the players are together, they want to move like a herd. They don't want the rogue to just go into the room. They all go into the room. But it's like, well, if you always all go into the room, then you're always all getting discovered, right? So yes, it forces the characters to do some things that are a little unbelievable from our perspective, but I think the payoff is better immersion and more risk-reward decision-making when it comes to exploration encounters specifically. Last thing, ending days or scenes with the dialogue option to encourage freeform RP. So one of the biggest concerns I'm sure some people are imagining in this idea of always playing in turns is, well, what about role playing? Like, that's just so weird if I want to be able to have a conversation with the other character. I have to wait till my turn or I can't speak out of turn. No, that's silly. But I just want the expectation at my table to be, if it's not your turn, it's best to let whoever's turn it is have that moment. But know this, and assume you're one of my players. At the end of any major encounter, and at the end of any day of travel, basically, there is always going to be the campfire scene or the dialogue option where all the players can basically have a moment for anybody who wants to raise their hand, essentially be like, I wanted to go talk to this character. That's their moment to do that. And I'm going to express it to my players like this because I'm not doing this just to have some cool RP moment. I am doing it this way to cue the players in on and let them know, kind of like a little wink of, I know you guys want to roleplay. I want you to do that too. So here's this like really flexible, cool moment to do some of those conversations that you might be stressed about as a player. Oh, I want to talk to this character about this thing, but what if I don't get the chance before the session's over? I'm just going to do it right now. That's the exact thing that I'm trying to sort of not get rid of, because there will be times where it's just like, I do need to talk to this character right now. But there are other times where that conversation after the big fight could probably wait until the end of the day or the session. That idea I could see some people really disliking, but I'm curious to hear why. Last thing, I already talked about this a lot. It's the calendar of Necrobell from Mörk Borg, which is you're rolling whatever dice you want, a D4 or a D6 or a D8, whatever, at the end of each day, or every dawn, I think. And on a 1, some apocalyptic event comes true. And if you do that enough times, the world ends. Point number 2, though, is I'm thinking I'm going to change it. Instead of 7 psalms, I'm going to do D6 days. So at the start of every day, you're rolling a D6. And if it's a 1, then that means something terrible happens. And I'm doing D6 days because that means you only need to roll 3 ones. That is a little too quick though. Like, I don't want my world or my campaign to come to an end that fast. So instead, we'll move on to the next point, that Doomsday can be staved off by serving missions for the Church of Doom. I think that's going to be what it is. If the players are seeing that the world seems to be coming to an end around them and horrible things are happening, then maybe they are sought out by, or they seek out this mysterious Church of Doom who sends them on some unholy mission that will ask more of them than they're probably prepared to give, but it does mean saving the realm. And what's so cool about that mechanic, I think, going to point 4 here in our last point, is that it is a built-in timer for the world in the campaign. It's creating dire stakes that I am not forcing. And it is also up to the players to decide, are we going to do anything about that? Is it more important to us to wrap up whatever we've got going on in our characters' lives before the end of the world than it is to necessarily prevent the end of the world, if that makes sense? So brothers and sisters, that brings me to the end of my sermon today. That is everything I'm thinking about doing differently in the Doomed campaign. All of this is going to be, and I already have actually been documenting a lot of this over on Patreon as part of my morning ritual, which is my sort of as close to daily as I can do it. So if you aren't already following me on Patreon, which you can do for free, and get my blog and follow along with my progress of the Doomed campaign and stuff, you should check it out. But yeah, before I end it out, let's do our Q&A. Let's hang out with y'all.